Europe 1943, Nazi Germany almost subjugated the whole of Europe. The Allies joined forces to counter the threat. Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter are watching the preparations for the experiment to create a super soldier. The general asks Peggy to wait for the end of the experiment in the control room, but she decides to stay a little closer to Steve. Steve takes his place in the capsule. Dr. Erskine explains how the experiment will be held. Peggy notices that one of those present is behaving suspiciously. The guest clicks the lighter and heard a powerful explosion. The villain fires at Steve and he falls to the floor. Spy Hydra pulls out of the capsule ampoule serum super soldier trying to escape, but the crater blocks his path and kills. Peggy rushes to the wounded Rogers. Howard Stark warns that the voltage drops. If it is not the end of the experiment, then there is no second chance. General orders Steve to return to the capsule, but he is not able to continue the experiment. Stark refuses to climb into the capsule. Peggy takes the place of Steve and Stark starts the device. The capsule blue light glows. The door of the capsule be opened and Howard picks up Peggy. Admiring Steve looks at his friend. The experiment was a success. In the hospital, General Flynn expressed dissatisfaction. He was promised an army of super soldiers, but in the end he gets the girl. Crater thinks he can fight on the front line, but Flynn refuses her. He believes that women can't fight on the front lines. Peggy and Steve talking in the hall for training. Peggy beats punching bag. She is dissatisfied with the decision of the general, but Steve says that it's not so bad. Past the windows is a band of soldiers. Steve talks about his friend Bucky Barnes, who composed 107th Brigade was sent to the front line, but he doesn't know where exactly. A Nazi detachment under the command of the Red Skull arrives in the town of Tinsburg in Norway. In a small church, the Skull finds a tesseract, an artifact of unprecedented power. The Scooper takes the artifact. The Nazis kill the priest. Carter and Stark try to convince General Flynn of the need to get a tesseract, but the general refuses them. Peggy is sitting in a bar. Stark comes to her. He gives Agent Carter a suit and a shield made of vibranium. The Hydra squad is moving along a Berlin street. Dr. Zola is sitting in the back of one of the trucks. He has a box with a tesseract in his hands. Peggy Crater is watching the Nazis from the top of the building. She jumps off the building and landed in front of the detachment of soldiers trying to crush her, but Peggy can easily reverses both the truck and pushes motorcycles, trucks popping up from the soldiers, but the Crater beating them one by one. There is now a Nazi. Peggy with 3 punches sends it to the knockout. Peggy grabs the doctor and others and tesseract. It delivers the artifact to General Flynn and needs to raise her to the rank of captain. Peggy gives tesseract Stark. Howard energy of tesseract creates iron armor for Steve Rogers. Steve and Peggy decide to find a squad of tanks who got captured by Hydra. Peggy catches up with riding on a motorcycle soldier Hydra and knocks him to the ground. Peggy flies on a motorcycle on the Hydra base. She throws the bike into the tower and destroys Pullman. Peggy sneaks into the prison and frees Bucky and the rest of the squad. Carter gets out. They will be surrounded by German tanks. Carter requested air support. Steve arrives in an iron suit and begins to destroy tanks. Peggy persuades Initia to Rogers and they both destroy the entire technique of the Nazis. Peggy, Steve, and the others involved in numerous operations in the war. They destroy the Nazi factories, aircraft, and equipment. The actions of the Crater cause dissatisfaction in Nazi command. This Netavolstvo, a Nazi officer, makes the Red Skull. He says that soon it will arrive champion from another world and that the Skull is not going to respond to Hitler. Skull kills the officer and removes the mask. The soldiers begin to chant Hail Hydra. Steve and Peggy talk in a bar. Rogers asks how Peggy feels. Crater and Rogers almost kiss, but Stark comes running and calls them with him. Peggy's squad is watching a train rushing along the rails. There may be a Red Skull in it. The squad needs to capture it. Steve in a suit slows down the train so that the others can climb on it. Steve opens the car and sees that the train is packed with explosives. Rogers warns Drews about the danger. Peggy and the others manage to jump off the train. An explosion is heard. Rogers disappears into the gorge. Peggy calls a friend in despair. Bucky and the others take Carter away from a dangerous place. General Flynn shouts at Stark. Howard is sure that the iron suit is indestructible, and now the general has neither a suit nor a tesseract. Peggy goes to Dr. Zolo. The Nazi scientist says he won't tell her anything. Peggy uses Zolo's information to make an operation plan and tells it to her squad. They need to destroy the Red Skull Fortress and destroy Hydra. Peggy infiltrates the fortress and deals with the guards. She opens the gates for her squad, destroying the defense squad. Carter and the others split up to search the fortress. At this time, the Skull puts a Tesseract in the car and opens a portal to another dimension. Barnes discovers an iron suit and Steve Rogers in the basement. Carter and Stark find the Skull laboratory. Giant tentacles appear from the portal. The Skull triumphs. But at this moment, a tentacle grabs him and crushes him. Bucky brings Steve to his senses. Rogers asks to put him in a suit. With the help of a generator, Barnes and Steve charge the suit. Rogers flies to Peggy. The tentacles kill all the Nazis and demolish the laboratory. Stark sits down at the remote to disable the portal. Peggy fights with tentacles. She cuts off several with the sword she found. Steve appears, and the others join the battle. The monster makes a terrible roar and starts breaking the ceiling. Steve takes his friends away from the monster. Stark cannot close the portal. Peggy pushes the monster back into his dimension. Steve's suit is discharged and he unable to help her. Peggy hides in the portal and Stark closes it. Steve is kneeling next to the Tesseract in the middle of the ruins of the castle. The portal opens in another room. Peggy Crater jumps out of it. Nick Fury and Hawkeye greet her. At this time, somewhere in space, a Star-Lord arrives on an abandoned planet. In the temple, he finds what he needs, a metal sphere. The Lord takes the sphere and is about to leave, but he is stopped by 3 soldiers of Ronan the Accuser. They also need a sphere. One of the Sot turns out to be a fan of the Star-Lord, but still enters when he gets into a fight. The Lord overcomes all 3 and leaves the temple. An armed detachment of Ronan soldiers is waiting for him at the exit. The soldiers demand to give them the sphere. The Lord says that he is not alone since the Devastators do not go alone. Yondu appears and kills all the soldiers. They board the ship together with the Lord and fly away from planets. 1988 year. Little T'Challa talks to his father. The child does not like that Wakanda is closed to the whole world. He wants to go outside the country, but the father is skeptical about the outside world. He believes that pain, lies, and violence reign there. T'Challa plays at the borders of Wakanda when Devastators arrive on Earth to kidnap the son of Celestial Ego, but Yondu's subordinates kidnap the wrong child. Little T'Challa is brought to Yondu. Yondu scolds his subordinates, but they do not see much difference between Peter Quill and T'Challa. T'Challa is not at all scared of Yondu and his team. On the contrary, he is glad to see new worlds. 20 years later, T'Challa and the Devastators arrive at the space bar. The Devastators recall their exploits. Thanos joins them. The Lord approaches the bar. The bartender Drax is photographed with him. T'Challa talks to Nebula. She asks if T'Challa thinks to return to Earth, but the Lord replies that Wakanda has been destroyed for a long time. The Nebula has a new job for the Lord and the spoilers. They need to steal a unique artifact from the Collector. Yondu refuses to deal with the Collectors. T'Challa convinces Yondu agree. The Ravagers of Primetown at the base of the Collector on the planet Oblivion. Yondu and Nebula are coming to the Collector under the guise of merchants, and yet Thanos and the others distract the guards of T'Challa is selected from a hiding place and into the hall. Collector of T'Challa frees Howard the Duck, that he held it to the fire of life. The protection of Collectioner understands that distract him and trigger the alarm. Storage T'Challa finds a ship from the Finding Wakanda and hears a message from his father. Yondu Devastator and Kilo locked in the camera. T'Challa angry Yondu. He lied to him about the fact that Wakanda destroyed. Kilo transplanted to another cell. The Collector ordered to open Star-Lord. Nebula frees Devastator. Their capture is part of the plan T'Challa to steal the embers of the existence of T'Challa selected from cells. Raise the alarm. The Collector attacks Kilo and the fight begins. The Collector uses the artifacts to defeat Kilo. Devastator catches protection. Thanos remains to hold them. Yondu attacks Collector. Guard beating Thanos. The Mad Titan is defeated, but the Nebula save him. She shoots the guards and then lets you run on the embers of existence. A huge plant stems to cover the whole of the street and rip the guards on the side. Nebula supports Thanos and leads to the ship. Collector breaks the arrow. Yoda and his Bivijas T'Challa relieved and excited to help Yondu. Yondu removes the bracelet from a Collector's hand and opens the iodine of cells. T'Challa pushes Collectionera in a cage and locks her slave. Collector opens all the cells and releases the prisoners. The crowd of angry prisoners coming to the Collector. Yondu and T'Challa Varandysky sit on the ship and preparing to depart. To join them in the space dog Astro, T'Challa wants to visit his home planet. wants to go back to Wakanda. T'Challa and the others arrive in Wakanda and get acquainted with his father. The king of Finding Wakanda holds a feast in honor of the return of the sun. In a small diner, Peter Quill washing floors. After the change, it comes Ego and seems to be his father. Dear friends, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. This is important to me.